A man is dead on a rural stretch of highway in Ohio County, Kentucky. Before the sun even comes up, a woman walks into the sheriff's office and reports a shooting. Within hours, a Beaver Dam man is in custody, charged with murder, and held without bond. That is the version of the story that moved quickly through local headlines. But the deeper you look, the more the clean outline starts to fray. There are conflicting ages for both the victim and the suspect. A weapon recovered from a pond that has not yet been publicly confirmed through ballistics. A relationship between the two men that authorities have only vaguely acknowledged, and a set of charges that raise as many questions as they answer. This is not a rushed summary of the latest arrest. This is a careful breakdown of exactly what has been confirmed, what different outlets are reporting differently, what the charges actually mean under Kentucky law, and what still remains unknown as the case moves into the court system. Stay with me until the end, because the most important parts of this story are the ones that haven't been clearly answered yet. The victim. Let's start with what we know about the victim. The Ohio County Coroner's Office has identified him as Darin Rice, a resident of Horse Branch in Ohio County. Most official and local reporting, including the coroner's office and outlets such as Wonky and Wet, list his age as 39. The Messenger Inquirer, citing Sheriff Adam Wright directly, reported him as 36. That 3-year gap has not been publicly reconciled by authorities as of the latest available reporting. Beyond his name, age discrepancy, and residence in Horse Branch, very little additional biographical information has been released. Authorities have not publicly confirmed details about his family, occupation, or personal background. In the early stages of a homicide investigation, this limited release of personal information is common, both to protect the privacy of those close to the victim and to avoid introducing unverified details into the public record while the case is still developing. An autopsy was completed at the Kentucky State Medical Examiner's Office in Louisville. As of the most recent updates, officials have not released the cause or manner of death. Withholding those findings is standard practice during an active homicide investigation. Prosecutors and investigators typically wait until later stages of the case, often closer to grand jury proceedings or trial preparation, allowing forensic conclusions to become part of the public record in order to avoid compromising the integrity of the evidence or the ongoing investigation. Now to the suspect. He has been identified as Jesse Baize, a resident of Beaver Dam in Ohio County. The Messenger Inquirer, citing Sheriff Adam Wright, reported his address as the 200 block of Veller Drive and listed his age as 35. Multiple other outlets, including WPO and the Ohio County Sheriff's Office's own initial release, reported him as 36. As with the victim's age, this discrepancy appears in the public record and has not been clarified by officials. Beyond his name, the reported age range, and his Beaver Dam address, authorities have released very little additional personal information about Baize. No details about his occupation, family, or background have been publicly confirmed in connection with this case. What is not in dispute is the set of charges he faces. According to the Ohio County Sheriff's Office, Baize has been charged with murder, tampering with physical evidence, third-degree criminal trespassing, and failure to report the death of a person. He was located at his residence in Beaver Dam, arrested without incident, and transported to the Ohio County Detention Center, where he was being held without bond as of the most recent reporting. How the night unfolded. Here's how the sheriff's office says the night played out. In the early hours of Monday, while most of Ohio County was still dark and quiet, a woman walked into the Ohio County Sheriff's Office around 3:30 in the morning. She was there to report a shooting. That detail matters. This wasn't a 911 call from a distance or a scene deputies happened upon. Someone with direct knowledge of what had happened chose to drive to the sheriff's office in person and make the report face-to-face. Based on what that witness told them, detectives were able to narrow down a suspect relatively quickly. Deputies were then dispatched to a residence in the 15,000 block of US Highway 62 East, near the small community of Horse Branch. When they arrived, they found Darin Rice suffering from a gunshot wound. Despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead at the scene. With the witness's account in hand, investigators identified Jesse Baize as their primary suspect. Detectives and deputies traveled the short distance to his home in Beaver Dam. According to the Messenger Inquirer's reporting, they located him there and took him into custody without incident. He was then transported to the sheriff's office. Once at the sheriff's office, Baize invoked his right to an attorney. It's important to be precise about what that means. Invoking the right to counsel is not evidence of guilt. It is a constitutional protection available to every person in custody. Using it simply means the formal interview ended at that point, and Baize did not answer further questions from investigators. From the moment the witness walked through the door of the sheriff's office to the moment Baize was in custody, the sequence moved quickly. But speed does not equal a completed picture. As of the latest reporting, authorities have not publicly detailed what the witness saw, what exactly led to the shooting, or the full circumstances that brought these two men together that night. Those answers, if they come, will emerge later through the investigation and the court process. The charges. Explained, a charge sheet by itself doesn't tell you much. The real weight of a case sits in what prosecutors actually have to prove in court, how Kentucky classifies each offense, and what a conviction can realistically carry. So, let's break down every charge Jesse Baize is facing, one by one, with the legal definitions and practical meaning. Murder under Kentucky law. A person is guilty of murder when they intentionally cause the death of another person, or when they cause a death by engaging in conduct that shows extreme indifference to human life. That second path, extreme indifference, is sometimes called wanton murder. It covers situations where someone doesn't necessarily set out with the specific goal of killing, but their actions create such a high and unjustifiable risk of death that the law treats it as murder anyway. Kentucky officially labels murder a capital offense. In theory, that opens the door to the death penalty, or life without the possibility of parole. But those maximum punishments are only available if prosecutors can prove at least one specific statutory aggravating circumstance listed in a separate section of the criminal code. Examples of aggravators include killing a police officer, killing during the commission of certain other serious felonies, or a prior capital conviction. Nothing in the public reporting on this case indicates that prosecutors have alleged any aggravating circumstance. Without an aggravator, murder is prosecuted as a Class A felony. In Kentucky, a Class A felony carries a sentencing range of 20 years to life in prison. That is the range Baize would face if convicted of murder as the case currently stands. To get a conviction, the Commonwealth must prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt. That includes proving the required mental state, either specific intent to kill, or that extreme indifference to human life. This is a meaningfully higher bar than the mental state required for manslaughter. First-degree manslaughter, for example, generally involves intending to cause serious physical injury, but not death. Second-degree manslaughter involves a lower level of recklessness. Because of that difference, it is entirely possible for a jury to reject the murder charge and instead convict on a lesser-included homicide offense, depending on what the evidence ultimately shows about Baize's state of mind that night. Tampering with physical evidence. This charge applies when a person believes an official proceeding is pending or may be started, and they destroy, mutilate, conceal, remove, or alter physical evidence with the intent to impair its truthfulness or its availability in that proceeding. It can also cover fabricating evidence. In practical terms, this is the charge that often appears when a weapon, clothing, or other item connected to a crime is moved, hidden, or disposed of after the fact. It is classified as a Class D felony, the lowest felony level in Kentucky. A Class D felony carries a possible sentence of 1 to 5 years in prison and a fine. Even though it is the lowest felony tier, a conviction still results in a felony record. Third-degree criminal trespassing. This charge is frequently misunderstood in media coverage. Under current Kentucky law, third-degree criminal trespass occurs when a person knowingly enters or remains unlawfully on premises. Critically, it is classified only as a violation, not a misdemeanor, and not a felony, unless the trespass happens during a declared state of emergency caused by a natural or man-made disaster. As a plain violation, the maximum penalty is a fine. It does not carry any potential jail time on its own. Authorities have not publicly detailed the exact property or circumstances that led to this charge in Baize's case. By definition, however, it means prosecutors believe he was on property without permission, and that none of the more serious factors, such as entering a dwelling or ignoring posted fencing, that would elevate the charge to a higher degree of trespass were present. Failure to report the death of a person. Kentucky law places a clear legal duty on any person who finds or has possession of a dead body under circumstances that make it a coroner's case. That person must immediately notify both the coroner and a law enforcement agency. The charge of failing to report a death reflects an alleged breach of that duty. The inclusion of this charge is significant because it suggests investigators believe a meaningful period of time passed between the moment Rice was shot and the moment authorities were actually notified. That aligns with the earlier detail that it was a witness, not Baize, who eventually walked into the sheriff's office to report what had happened. These 4 charges, taken together, form the formal case against Jesse Baize as it exists in the public record right now. The murder charge carries by far the most serious potential consequences. The remaining 3 charges, while less severe on their own, paint a picture of what prosecutors currently believe happened after the shooting itself. What the evidence will ultimately support and how a jury may interpret Baize's intent and actions will be decided later in the legal process. The search for the weapon now, to the search for physical evidence. In the hours after Baize's arrest, the Ohio County Sheriff's Office began looking for the firearm believed to have been used in the shooting. Initial statements from the Sheriff's Office described deputies searching a nearby lake, later reporting from K105, and confirmed by WKO, added important specificity. The search was centered on a pond located off U.S. Highway 231, south of Hartford. After several hours of searching that body of water, authorities recovered what they described as a long rifle, the item they believed to be the murder weapon. The phrasing "believed to be" is doing real work here, and it's worth pausing on that. Recovering a firearm from a pond or lake does not, by itself, prove that the gun was used in a particular shooting. That link still has to be established through forensic testing, primarily ballistics comparison. Until those results are completed and made part of the official record, the recovered rifle remains a significant piece of potential evidence rather than confirmed proof. In general terms, what can and cannot survive submersion in water is useful context. The internal characteristics of a firearm's barrel, the microscopic striations and lands and grooves that leave unique markings on a fired bullet, typically remain intact even after a gun has been underwater. That means ballistics examiners can often still match a recovered bullet or cartridge case to a specific firearm long after it has been submerged. Trace evidence is a different story. Fingerprints, DNA, and other biological material degrade much more quickly in water, and the longer an item remains submerged, the less likely investigators are to recover usable trace evidence from its surface. None of this tells us what examiners have actually found, or will find, on the rifle recovered in this case. Those details have not been released. What we do know is that the recovery of a long rifle from the pond off Highway 231 is one of the more concrete investigative steps that has been made public so far. It also helps explain why Baize was charged with tampering with physical evidence. Prosecutors appear to believe the firearm was removed from the original scene and disposed of in the water. As with every other part of this case, the full meaning of the recovered rifle will depend on laboratory results and how that evidence is presented in court. For now, it stands as a recovered item that investigators consider important, but not yet a fully verified piece of the puzzle. What's still unknown? For all that has been reported so far, several important pieces of this case remain publicly unknown. On the relationship between the two men, one outlet reported that authorities believe Darin Rice and Jesse Baize knew each other. That is the full extent of what has been said on the record. No further details have been released about how they knew each other, how long they had known each other, or what the nature of that connection was. There has been no public description of any prior interactions, disputes, or shared history between them. Equally important, no motive has been disclosed. Authorities have not stated what, if anything, led to the shooting in the early morning hours of that Monday. They have not described any argument, confrontation, or sequence of events that preceded the gunshot. In the absence of that information, it would be irresponsible to fill in the gaps with assumptions. Anything beyond the limited statement that the two men reportedly knew each other is speculation. And speculation is not something to lean on when one man has lost his life and another man's legal future is still being decided in the court system. Other key details also remain unanswered in the public record. Authorities have not released the official cause and manner of death from the autopsy. They have not detailed what the witness who came to the sheriff's office actually saw or heard. They have not described the exact circumstances under which the long rifle was allegedly removed from the scene and later recovered from the pond. And they have not said whether any additional charges or arrests remain possible as the investigation continues. These gaps are not unusual in the early stages of a homicide case. Investigators often withhold information to protect the integrity of the evidence, to avoid tainting potential witness accounts, and to preserve their ability to test statements against physical findings later. What is available right now is a framework of confirmed facts: a shooting, a death, a rapid arrest, a set of charges, and a recovered firearm. The fuller story, including intent, sequence, and motive, is still being assembled behind the scenes. Until more information is officially released through court filings or further statements from investigators, the responsible approach is to stay with what is known and resist the urge to invent the rest. What happens next? As of the most recent reporting available, Jesse Baize was being held in the Ohio County Detention Center without bond. At that time, neither Kentucky's online court records nor the detention center had listed a date for his first court appearance. That status can change quickly. In Kentucky, bond decisions are typically revisited at an arraignment or a dedicated bond hearing. At that stage, a judge weighs several factors, including whether the defendant is a flight risk, whether he poses a danger to the community, and the strength of the evidence the Commonwealth presents in those early proceedings. A no-bond hold right after a murder arrest is not unusual, particularly while key pieces of evidence are still being recovered and processed. From this point forward, the case is expected to move through a series of relatively predictable stages, though the exact timeline will depend on the schedule of the Ohio County Circuit Court and how both sides choose to proceed. The first formal step is usually an arraignment. At arraignment, the defendant is brought before a judge, formally advised of the charges against him, and asked to enter a plea, typically not guilty at this early stage. The court may also revisit the question of bond at that hearing. Because this case involves a murder charge, it will almost certainly be presented to a grand jury. In Kentucky, a grand jury is a group of citizens who hear evidence presented by prosecutors in a closed proceeding. Their role is not to decide guilt or innocence, but to determine whether there is probable cause to believe a crime was committed and that the accused person committed it. If the grand jury finds probable cause, it returns a formal indictment. An indictment is what officially advances the case into the circuit court for further proceedings. Once a case is indicted, it enters the pretrial phase. This is often the longest part of the process. During pretrial, both the prosecution and the defense exchange evidence through a process called discovery. This is typically when more detailed information, forensic results from the autopsy and the recovered rifle, witness statements, investigative reports, and other materials, begins to move from being internal investigative work into the formal court record. In many cases, this is also the stage at which additional facts become public, not through new press conferences, but through motions, hearings, and filings that are part of the court file. After pretrial litigation is complete, the case would normally proceed toward trial. However, a large share of felony cases in Kentucky, as in most states, are resolved through plea agreements before a trial ever begins. A plea agreement can involve a guilty plea to the original charges or to reduce charges in exchange for a recommended sentence. Whether that path is taken in this case will depend on the strength of the evidence, the positions of both sides, and decisions made as the discovery process unfolds. For now, the case remains in its earliest formal stages. Baize remains charged, not convicted. The next concrete developments to watch for will likely be an arraignment date, a bond decision, and eventually a grand jury indictment. Those steps will determine how quickly the rest of the process moves forward. A note on presumption of innocence. It's worth stating plainly, because it's easy to lose sight of in coverage like this. Jesse Baize has been charged. He has not been convicted of anything. Under the American legal system, he is presumed innocent unless and until a jury finds otherwise, or he enters a guilty plea. A murder charge means prosecutors and investigators currently believe they have enough evidence to bring the case forward. It is not, by itself, a finding of fact about what happened that night. The complete account, including intent and what actually led to the shooting, will come out through the legal process, not through initial police statements or early news coverage. Where this happened. For context, Ohio County sits in west-central Kentucky, a largely rural area, home to small communities like Horse Branch and the county seat of Hartford, with Beaver Dam a few miles away. The address in this case, along U.S. Highway 62 East, runs through a stretch of farmland and modest residential properties typical of the area. That's not commentary on the case itself, just geographic context for anyone unfamiliar with the region. Where the case stands. As it stands, authorities have not released the official cause or manner of death, have not detailed what led to the shooting, and have not said whether further charges or arrests are possible. The investigation remains open, led by the Ohio County Sheriff's Office, alongside the Coroner's Office and the State Medical Examiner. Updates from here will most likely come through official court filings, an arraignment date, a bond hearing outcome, an indictment, rather than additional press statements, so it may be a while before the next real update surfaces. If you want to stay caught up as cases like this develop, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. This video is based on publicly available reporting from law enforcement statements and local news outlets at the time of publication, including discrepancies between sources that have been noted directly, rather than resolved by guesswork. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent, unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Details of this case may change as the investigation and legal proceedings continue.